My name is Tammy Horlocker. I'm the activities coordinator here at the center. The Center for Strength is a federally and state grant funded resiliency center that was set up in the aftermath of the school shooting at STEM School Highlands Ranch, May 7th, 2019. The mission of the center is to help educate our community and move forward in our trauma and resiliency journey. And part of what we'd like to do to help you is to learn different things about how trauma affects us. Our first lunch and learn today is going to be given by Evan Forster. Evan is a former lead clinician at the center, and he'll go into a little more detail about his background in his video. So bear with me for just a moment while I share.
Hello, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn. My name is Evan Forster, and today's Lunch and Learn will be about trauma and change, how we can support youth following mass violence. We'll talk a little bit about immediately in the aftermath, but definitely a lot more about what trauma looks like over time. So we'll talk about trauma timelines, window of tolerance, trauma, anxiety, ambiguity, and change, how those things are all related, how ambiguity can be difficult for folks. We'll talk about the population at STEM and how a lot of high achieving students are also going to have some anxiety, perfectionism, some other tendencies that I'd imagine you'd be familiar with. We'll talk about themes throughout the school year. Some of these have already passed and we can think about them for next year, and then some of them will probably come into. So first, a little bit about myself. And you'll notice my picture is kind of moving all over the screen. I was just trying to avoid the text. So I'm a clinical social worker. I'm currently a clinical supervisor of All Health Network school-based team. I was the clinical lead at the Center for Strength. Many of you who are watching this probably know me from that. It's one of my favorite positions that I've ever had within my career, and it was very difficult to move into the one that I'm in now. So I was working with folks who were impacted by the shooting on May 7th, both at the Center for Strength and then for the 2 years following May 7th, 2019. So I was part of All Health Network's disaster response in the fall as students returned to school in 2019 and worked within the school for the following 2 school years. In my social work career, I've worked in children's grief. That's where I started working. I've worked in foster care, done outpatient and school-based therapy, kind of done a little bit of a lot of different things. And then other things about myself, you'll see my beautiful family there. My wife, although the mustache is in that picture, wasn't as much of a fan as the mustache, so it's gone. But we also have my son Jack, my wife Sarah, and my daughter Emerson. That was up at that lake that turned this really cool green color over the summer. It's frozen right now, but I'd totally recommend checking it out. Hike wasn't too bad, but it was really, really cool. What you're not seeing there is the absolute tantrum that my 3-year-old threw on the way down from the hill. So, yeah. So jumping into things, this video is excellent psychoeducation. I show it to a lot of my clients to demonstrate what that fight, flight, freeze response is. One of the biggest things that I've learned in the work that I've done in trauma, in doing research, evidence-based practices, that kind of thing, understanding the trauma response, honoring the trauma response for what it is, it's your brain trying to protect you, is incredibly impactful for folks, for anyone who's experienced trauma, regardless of what it is, rather than just trying to push through it. This video does a great job of explaining the fight, flight, freeze, survivor response. And they do a great job of drawing it out a lot better than I could definitely do for my clients. So I'll be quiet and we can watch this video.
Humans, like all species, have self-protective mechanisms to help us survive. Our fight, flight, or freeze survival response, the FFF for short, is designed to mobilize our brain and body to fight an enemy, run from an avalanche, or freeze to hide from a predator. Our brain sometimes misinterprets safe situations as dangerous and can set off false alarms. When the amygdala, our brain's watchdog, senses and barks danger, our body enters survival mode quicker than our rational mind can react, leaving it trying to figure out why we feel in mortal danger. When the FFF alarm is sounded, we start to breathe more quickly and shallow, causing hyperventilation, and our heart starts beating very fast. These changes can cause strong chest pain, which many people interpret as symptoms of a heart attack, when in fact it's just a result of the FFF activation, which can be relieved through breathing exercises. As a way of getting you ready for action, blood is diverted towards the major muscle groups. Blood flows away from our digestive system, causing the bladder to relax, and we might feel the need to pee. The mouth goes dry, nausea can occur, and we get the butterflies feeling in our stomach. Blood also rushes from extremities, leaving us with cold hands, but often sweaty palms as the action-ready body starts sweating to avoid overheating. Legs and hands can start trembling and feel weak, while tension starts building in big muscles like the thighs, neck, and shoulders. In our head, FFF alarms cause our brain to focus on negative memories, probably so it can scan them to avoid danger and negative outcomes. We get tunnel vision as our pupils dilate to increase our focus and long vision, but as a result, we lose our peripheral vision. FFF activation also reduces our ability to recognize differences in facial expressions. Too much oxygen and too little CO2 can result in dizziness or lightheadedness, which many people interpret as signs that they might faint. But because fainting is caused by a drastic drop in blood pressure, and because the FFF increases both our heart rate and blood pressure, it's nearly impossible to faint when this happens. Over time, depression, anxiety, and high levels of stress all harm the brain's ability to slow or cancel false FFF activations, causing them to happen more often. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects. At Tanky Boxing, you can learn both bottom-up and top-down techniques to reduce false FFF activation and bring your body back to balance.
I think that video does one of the best jobs of describing that response that I've been able to find, that clients have found understandable and that kind of thing. A couple big takeaways from that is one, it's a normal response to experience panic, to experience stress and that kind of thing. That's your brain trying to keep you safe. And then the other thing, the big thing sort of at the end there is, if we can honor those false alarms that are happening, it helps us to not experience anxiety, depression, that kind of thing after a traumatic event, because we're paying a little bit more attention to what's happening. Trying to move into the next slide. So, talking about trauma in the brain, this I think is a really good diagram of what the different aspects of our brain are doing. I probably talk the most with folks that I'm working with about our prefrontal cortex, and our amygdala. Prefrontal cortex, that's that human part of our brain. It's responsible for complex thinking. It's responsible for decision making, behavior. If I do this, then this might happen. Many of y'all might have seen the diagram of or the model of the brain that's the fist. And so if this is the front of my brain, let's do it this way so it looks like the brain in the picture. So this is that prefrontal cortex. So when we're not triggered, when we're not experiencing our fight, flight, freeze response, this part's totally intact. It's working great. We're able to think about the next steps to a process or whatever. Now, when we experience a reminder of trauma, or if we just experience a time where our body feels threatened, whether or not we've experienced trauma, that prefrontal cortex, if you think of it sort of like a dimmer switch, it sort of turns off, and it can be super abrupt and be completely off, or it can be very gradual and kind of be somewhat intact and somewhat not intact. So that's when we have this PTSD brain where it's a little bit harder to make decisions. We might respond inappropriately or whatever. And that's because our amygdala is setting off that fight, flight, freeze response. And so that's happening because our brain's interpreting something as dangerous. And maybe that's a traumatic reminder, like it says about PTSD brain here, or maybe it's a legitimate threat. What's important to recognize is if it is a false alarm that's happening, just like that video that we had just watched, taking a moment, identifying what that alarm is, what is causing the panic. Am I safe? Am I unsafe? Monitoring your surroundings, taking a few deep breaths. One thing that can be really helpful to re-engage that prefrontal cortex is taking a few deep breaths. A dumb metaphor that I use with a lot of folks that I'm talking to is point to something in the room. So what you can see, oh, that shoulder, is the Sparty head behind me. Michigan State, that's where I went to school, not a STEM Spartan. It was really odd for me when I was working in the school and STEM's colors were blue and gold, which are obviously Michigan's colors, and it's still a Spartan head. So anyway, we got our Sparty head back there. That turned into a raptor or a T-Rex or any type of dinosaur. I'm probably not going to be taking slow, deep, measured breaths because I'm recognizing there's a dinosaur behind me. I should probably get out of this room. Now, if it's a legitimate threat, I'm running. I'm getting out of this room immediately. Now, if I say, oh no, that just reminded me of something scary back there, I can take a minute, take that breath, and I can re-engage that prefrontal part of my brain and go like this. Hypothalamus is responsible for releasing those stress hormones. And then the hippocampus is where our brain stores our memories. And the hippocampus is really impacted by trauma-specific types of therapy. So after a traumatic event, traumatic memories are stored very differently than normal ones. And that's because, again, our brain wants to keep us safe. It wants to remind us of those things that were difficult because it never wants us to be in those positions again. And so a type of memory where there is, or a type of therapy where there is space to reprocess a traumatic memory, like EMDR or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or any of the myriad of therapies that are listed in the Body Keeps a Score book, which some of you may have participated in. If not, I'm sure we're going to run another book club, so keep an eye out for that. So any of those memories, it helps our brain to store the memory more, or any of those therapies can help our brain store the memory more normally. So for some people, that also just happens with time. Therapy isn't something that every single person should go to. It's just something that works for some people and doesn't work for others. But it might be worth exploring if you are noticing, or you know somebody that's noticing flashbacks happening pretty often, panic happening pretty often, that kind of thing. All right, just bounce to the next one. So response over time. And so what we see is pre-disaster period. This is basically neutral. That's not really what we're focused on. We have this, we have an impactful event. So for this community, that would be May 7th. After that event, what we see and what we see in a lot of different communities is a community really coming together, a big sense of connection for a lot of people. That's fantastic. It's, you know, humans can work really well together, can provide a lot of support. And then after that honeymoon period is kind of over, we experience this period of disillusionment. Reality kind of sets in. Things are different. Things have changed. We have things like triggering events, whether that's national news, whether that's reminders, court dates, any of those things. But really what I'm trying to highlight here is this reconstruction phase, because that's where I believe the community is in. And more specifically that this is not a linear process. We have our anniversary reactions, which we would imagine to be activating or difficult, or the year marks, regardless of how you want to refer to that. May is going to be difficult, or from everyone that I've spoken to, May is difficult. Folks that experience other mass violence events, the month that it happened is a difficult time. So that's an expected one. But working through grief is also hard. And other national news things are also hard. However, just because we have these little setbacks, that does not mean the community is not moving forward. And that's something that I really try to stress with folks, to not expect it to be a linear process, but to highlight some of the things that are moving in the direction that you'd like them to move. We're often asked at the center, who do you serve? What has directly impacted me? And it's a hard question to answer, because I think the entire community is impacted when something like this happens. So we have our people that were injured, people that were families were impacted as but really what I want to highlight is, and what we try to do at the center is serve as much of the community as possible. If folks are impacted by this event, how can we be helpful to them? And what I do know is that there can be a lot of comparisons related to level of impact, and person A's level of impact, not actually using this term. Okay, person X's level of impact is different and more intense than person Y's, or person Z's level of impact is more intense than person, oh my gosh, J. And that's all normal. It's normal for everyone to have a different impact. It's normal for a person maybe that was very close to the event happening, whatever traumatic event it is, to have a similar impact to somebody who was in the next building over. Just as it's similar to maybe have a person that was very close to whatever event happening to have less of a intense response. All of our brains are different, but honoring how our brains are being impacted by the traumatic event is really important toward healing, and really important to that idea of recognizing those false alarms, or recognizing those things that are trauma reminders. So one way that we can do that, and one way that we can recognize how activated we are, is by looking at our window of tolerance. So what I like to describe is basically this middle area of the window of tolerance, and I know the words are small, but I'll walk you through it. This is comfortable. This middle area is where we learn things. That prefrontal cortex, if we use our fist, is fully engaged. We're good. We know that if I do this, then this next thing that happens is I'm ready to react to the next thing that happens, whether it is exactly what I think it is or not. So typically a person on a good day kind of goes through this day, moving up and down like this little squiggly line here, grounded, relaxed, curious, flexible, that one's huge, calm. Able to learn. I was hoping that was on there. Yeah, able to learn. This is where we want students to be too, which is why social emotional learning in schools is so important. Because if folks feel regulated within their classroom, they are going to be better at learning. They're going to perform better at tests. They're going to just do better in general. So it says dysregulation on this side and this side. Generally, I talk about this is kind of uncomfortable. And the higher we get, the closer we get to this line here, the more uncomfortable we are. Or the closer we get to this line here, the more uncomfortable we are. It's when anger kind of starts. We're feeling a little bit agitated. We're noticing that our prefrontal cortex, well, we're probably not noticing, but our prefrontal cortex is starting to become offline. But like I said, it's that dimmer switch. It's kind of still on there. Now, when fight, flight, freeze happens, when our amygdala gets triggered, when information comes into our brain and our brain associates that with, hey, this is dangerous, that's when we go into this hyper or hypoarousal state. Hyperarousal is a lot more obvious when it's happening for most people. Rage, panic, very, very anxious, feeling super overwhelmed, those kind of things. We're experiencing too much. That's hyper. And we'll talk a little bit about regulation strategies and stuff in just a few minutes. And then hypoarousal is one that a lot of folks experience after trauma, and a lot of people don't recognize it for what it is, in my opinion. Hypoarousal is that disassociation, detached. I don't know what happened. They don't have motivation anymore. I don't know what happened. They don't pay attention in class anymore. I don't know what happened. They're not doing the things that they used to do. So what's happening is a person's brain is taking in this information. So this is after a traumatic event. There's a ton of different reasons. A person being hypoarousal. I'm not attributing everything to that, but a person's brain is taking in information. That information can trigger that. Whoa, this is a traumatic reminder. And a way that humans and animals and everything protect ourselves is to shut down, to not experience that pain, to not experience that difficult thing, to just kind of turn it off. And so if we can recognize that hypoarousal, that freeze response is also a response to trauma, it can be very impactful. Another thing about hyperarousal that I forgot to mention, and I think it's important, is that hypervigilancy. It's kind of listed right there. That can look like, hey, it's hard to concentrate. Hey, my kid's fidgeting a lot more. It can look a lot like ADHD for a lot of people. And what we want to make sure that we do when we're noticing symptoms in folks after a traumatic event, recognizing what is related to trauma, what was happening before. Is it normal hypervigilance? Yeah, probably. And are there ways that we can help a person to feel safe? Some easy suggestions about ways to feel safe or create a sense of safety, which I like to say, is sitting so you can see a door. I always try to have I try to have offices where my clients can see a door, especially if I'm running a group where my clients can see a door. Encouraging a kid that's struggling to go into a classroom, sit where you can see the door. Another way to do it is notice your surroundings. Be proactive about what is around you. Notice, you walk into a store and notice what the people are looking like. Notice the sounds that are happening. Just trying to help that part of your brain that's already on that hypervigilant space. Just kind of take a look. You're noticing the false alarm that's happening or the alarm that's happening, and trying to work with it rather than just trying to shut it down and not be anxious. If we recognize, oh, this anxiety is trying to protect me, I'm going to glance around at my surroundings, make sure that that Spartan head is not a T-Rex behind me. That's going to help that hypervigilant part of our brain. So, ambiguity is really hard for folks in general. Ambiguity is really hard for folks who have experienced a traumatic event. Ambiguity is really hard for folks who have high achievement. An example of ambiguity, I would say, that many of you might have experienced, those that saw kids at STEM, is the transition in grades this year. I know from talking to some of the students that I worked with or sat with at the center or continue to talk to in the D&D groups that I run, there's a lot of confusion related to that. And we want to be as straightforward as possible, especially with folks who have had a traumatic experience, because control is so important. So I have a 3-year-old. He asks a ton of questions. It's normal for a 3-year-old. However, over asking questions can definitely get tiring. Recognizing it for what it is, especially as we're supporting a community following a traumatic event, over asking of questions is normal. It could be a way that that person is trying to get control. It could be a way that Jack, my son, is trying to get control. I'm not saying you have to be a saint at all times, and recognize where you're at, recognize where you are in your window of tolerance, but also if we can recognize, hey, that all those questions that that person is asking, it's probably related to them trying to get a sense of control. Structure, although seemingly restrictive, especially for folks who have teenagers, can reduce some anxiety. It doesn't have to be everything has to be structured or anything like that, but some form of structure can create normalcy, which definitely can reduce anxiety. And then, if you know that a change is gonna happen, talking to the person as much as you can beforehand, super important to reduce anxiety, reduce trauma responses. Prepare yourself for that first bit. The control is important. When you're saying, hey, there might be this change that happens. There might be this change in how we deliver your grades. Just want you to be prepared for it. I'm going to give you as much notice as possible beforehand so you can ask all of those questions. Prepare for that over asking of questions, but trying to acknowledge the changes that occurs, because structure and schedule can be very important for everyone. So moving in to achievement and anxiety. I've heard STEM described at times as a quirky school for quirky kids. And I thought that had hit the nail on the head for some of the things that I've noticed at STEM in the 2 years that I've been there. I love the population in STEM. I loved coaching basketball for STEM. And I know that STEM's got a little bit of a different population than other schools. I don't think I'd have nearly as many folks in my Dungeons and Dragons club at another school, or I might have to work a little bit harder to recruit than I have for STEM. And so just something to recognize when we have this, especially with high achievement, that can come with a lot of anxiety. And so acknowledging and talking to people, talking to your kids about the expectations that they have for themselves related to their grades can be really impactful. Asking them what they think I'm assuming it's mostly parents in here, asking them what they think your expectations are related to their grades. Where do those actually align with what you expect from them? And where are they different? Having open conversations and encouraging vulnerability, I think, is really important. Because STEM is a school where there's a lot of high achieving kids, that also comes with a lot of pressure from peers. It comes from that idea of, here's the school that I got into. What school did you get into? Especially, obviously, for folks that are upperclassmen, or I'm taking this AP course, or you taking that AP course. And so having discussions about how your team, how your friend, how they're impacted by those expectations, I think it's really important. All right. So what I've seen as far as themes in the school and the students that I work with, and this is definitely broadly applied outside of just STEM. First semester, you all probably saw this. There's that honeymoon period. Everybody's got it totally under control. It's fine. I've got 0 missing assignments. Things are going awesome. Then we have fall break happens. Then they get back from fall break and they're like, oh my God. I do have all those assignments and those projects that I put off so late in the semester. Obviously, I'm speaking super generally. If you don't experience this with your kid or your friends or your kid's friends or anybody like that, awesome, great. But these are some things that we definitely see. So highlighting that, knowing that, hey, this is a theme that happened last year. This is something that's happened in the previous years. Let's talk about that. That transition to college, very, very similar stuff. Although the crisis can sometimes occur a little bit earlier. Because it's like, oh my goodness, the workload is a little bit higher and I have all this freedom and it's so different. Having those conversations before it's a problem is obviously huge. Second semester, which has been kind of crazy this year because it seems like we haven't had an entire full week of school. I guess we've had like one. It's been wild. There's this period of, all right, I've learned from last semester, I'm going to do things differently. Got it under control. And then generally we do go a longer period with like no breaks, where it seems like in the previous semester we were coming from all of these different breaks. And then we also have the whole, it's gloomy and dark outside. So talking about how things are actually going to be different. So that goes to that catching things early, increased check-in on overall well-being outside of school, and being really strength-based, really highlighting those things. Schedules get super busy as kids get older. Schedules get super busy, period. Highlighting the strengths. Wow, you did a really good job on that. Goes a long way. The last intervention that I'll say is, and I know I'm probably going a little bit over on time here, is that skill not will dictates behaviors. I really like the premise of kids do well if they can. If my child has these skills, if a person has the skills to do this, they will likely do well. It's hard to identify skill not will when a person's struggling with motivation, but maybe that's disassociation that's happening. Maybe they're numb. It's hard to identify that when it seems like a person's just acting out to get attention. Hey, well, why are they struggling with attention? What's going on there? What's going on with their relationships that they feel like they need that? Looking a little bit more about skill deficits and working with a therapist, whether it's myself or Alexa over at the center now or anybody else, can be really, really impactful in identifying that and increasing insight for both yourself and your kids, your friends, that kind of thing. So I'm going to jump to the next page. Any questions? Please give them to Tammy. And I will make another video. It won't have this cool PowerPoint with the space theme. But yeah, I'll definitely make another video and send it Tammy's way or yeah, we'll figure something out, but I will get you the information as best as I can. I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to be there in person. For this, I really value my relationships with this community. I continue to feel honored in working with them and providing information for everybody, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I hope you all have a good day. I hope you can take something from this, and please ask questions. I'd be happy to respond with anything that I have. See you.
Thanks so much, Evan. That was very informative. If you guys have any questions, I realize this is a recording of the Lunch and Learn since we had technical difficulties in the actual date. Please send them to me via email. My email is Tammy, Tammy, at centerforstrength.org. Okay. Just if you have those questions, send them on to me. We'll get Evan to record another video. And our next Lunch and Learn is February 28th at noon, featuring Dr. Carrie Johns. She will be talking about how we can use CBT skills when we have unwanted thoughts. Thank you all and have a great day.